This is Pastor Is at Amazing Grace Ministries International. And today we are continuing our study in Daniel chapter 5. So if you grab your Bibles, we're going to learn about the son of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, and his name is Belshazzar. So we'll take a look at him and what God does to give him some encouragement in his day and show him how to walk rightly. So look at your Bibles. I'm going to just start by reading in Daniel chapter 5 this morning, and we'll pick up there. We read this. It says, Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold, the silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, in order that the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. And I'm getting blown with curtains hitting me. Excuse me for just a second. There we go. Let's see if that works. So they brought the gold vessels in verse 3 that had been taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drank from them. And they drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and of bronze and iron and wood and stone. This is kind of silly what you do when you get drunk, isn't it? You know, they're now worshiping rocks and metal. But suddenly it says the finger of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing, and the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts were alarmed, and in his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. Now, have you ever heard of someone being so afraid that their knees knock together and literally their hip joints go slack? I mean, they're like, oh, and they start to collapse, and they're all shaky. You know, this is. Yeah, their teeth is chattering, and oh, I'm so scared. This is literally the scene that Daniel is writing for us about this guy Belshazzar. He was literally knocking in his boots. We'd say he's scared as can be that this hand is writing on the wall. So the king calls out aloud to bring in the conjurers and the Chaldeans, and now these guys are the Chaldeans. Just think of like master astrologers today. That's what they would be kind of classified as. Bring in these guys and the diviners. And the king spoke to them and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me will be clothed in purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. He gets to be the triumvir in the original language, the third highest position in the kingdom. So then all the king's men came in, the wise men, and they could not read the inscription or make known to its interpretation to the king. And the king Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his face grew pale, even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. Now then it says the queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. And the queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. And do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom a spirit of the holy gods resides. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, and Chaldeans and diviners. This was because there was an extraordinary spirit on him of knowledge and insight and interpretation of dreams and explanations of enigmas and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. So the queen comes. Now, you saw earlier the Belshazzar was drinking with his wives and his concubines and all of his leaders. You know, he's got 1,000 guys he's trying to impress. So, you know, he brings out his wives as leader. But then the queen comes in. Now, who do you think this queen is? His mother. Yeah, this is historically believed to be, this is his mother, the one that was married as queen to Nebuchadnezzar. So this would be, mom comes in, queen mother, and says, hey, you got all these new conjurers and magicians and Chaldeans, astrologers around you. They can't solve it. But back in your dad's day, there was a guy who could solve all sorts of enigmas. He could do any kind. I love how she talks about him. She said he had an extraordinary spirit in verse 12, of knowledge and insight and interpretation of dreams and explanations of enigmas and solvings of difficult problems that were all found in this one guy, Daniel, whom your dad named Belteshazzar. Now, if you're wondering, I don't know a lot of Babylonian, but I looked up the names. Belshazzar. Bel is, of course, the prefix for Lord or King, and so Belshazzar is Lord, protect the king, and Belteshazzar is kind of like Lord of protecting the king's treasure. Some guys say it's Lord of the Straitened treasure, like organized, but it's like he's protecting it, keeping it in line and where it's accounted for. So this is the name that Nebuchadnezzar called Daniel. You get to be the guy that is the Lord of keeping the king's treasure straight. In other words, protecting the king's treasure. And it's interesting name that he would give him, because he gives it to him because Daniel is got such an extraordinary spirit of wisdom and able to solve all these enigmas and puzzles and all sorts of things. They don't stump Daniel, and the king's like, that's the guy I want in charge of my treasure. So he names him Belteshazzar. Now his son, he gets named Belshazzar, which is Lord, protect the king. Czar is king, so Lord, protect the king, protection over the king, not protection over the king's treasure, but the king himself. So then Daniel, it says in verse 13, was brought in, and the king spoke to Daniel. He said, are you that Daniel who was of the exiles of Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I've heard about you, that you have a spirit of the gods that is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Now, just now, the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make known its interpretation to me, but they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you're able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you're able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. And if I was Daniel, well, I'll show you what Daniel's answer is, but Daniel was already second ruler in the kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar. So now his son is offering him the third spot, like kind of demotion. But anyway, then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make its interpretation known to him. He says, O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty and grandeur and glory and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. And because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, whomever he wished he spared alive, whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory taken away from him. And he was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of the beasts. His dwelling place was with the wild donkeys, and he was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. So he gives a little recount of, Nebuchadnezzar's pride that we just studied about last week, and how God gave him some humble pie for 7 seasons and let his hair grow out like bird's feathers and his fingernails like claws. And he just had the mind of a beast for 7 years until he realized. He says, now Daniel is recapping something. Let me show you that even Belshazzar, his son, knew about. And I can show you that right in the next verses. Okay, he says it. He says, In verse 22, yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. You might want to highlight that part in verse 22. He didn't walk humbly, even though he saw how God served his dad humble pie. Now, he says to him, but you've exalted yourself in verse 23 against the Lord of heaven, and you've brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles and your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which, he says, which do not see, nor hear, nor understand. All of the gods made out of stuff down here on earth, chunks of metal and stone and wood. They're no. He says they don't see. They don't hear. You see a carved statue of somebody says, "Oh, this is my god right here," and they carved it out of a rock, and you go, "It's still a rock. It can't hear. It can't. I mean, you carved ears on it, but do the ears work? And do the eyes see?" And this is the foolishness of idolatry: is that these guys were praising the gods of rocks and of stones and metals and woods, and Daniel says, you guys have been sitting here, and on top of it, while you were doing this, you took the gold cups that were dedicated to the Lord back in Jerusalem in the temple, and your father captured, and you brought them out of the treasury, and you've been drinking out of stuff that was dedicated to the true living God. He says, you're messing up. You're worshiping the gods that can't see, can't hear, and can't understand. And instead, look at the end of verse 23. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and your ways, the one who's holding your very life breath in his hand, he says, you have not glorified. He's talking about the God. We're our God, our Father, the creator of heaven and the earth. And this is the one that he says, then that hand was sent from him. The God who holds your very life breath in his hand has sent this hand for you to see. And this inscription was written out. Now, this is the inscription, what was written out, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. So Mene is from a mina. These are all, by the way, these three words are coins. They're measurements of dollars, we'd say in English, but it's really shekels. Okay, so a mina, Mene is 50 shekels. Okay, 50 shekels, then is Mene, Mene, and then Tekel is it is a shekel. Okay, just one shekel. And then Upharsin is plural for cutting a shekel in half. So it's it's from the singular Perez. So Upharsin is a 1 shekel chopped in half, like a half a shekel. So you got 50 shekels, shekel, and half a shekel. And you go, what does that mean? Okay. But Daniel understands all enigmas and all mysteries and all these puzzles. So he's going to explain it to him. And I cheated. I read ahead, so I already know the answer. But he said, this is the interpretation in verse 26 of the message. Mene is God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel is you've been found weighed on the scales and found deficient. And Perez is your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. So let's use the money again. Mene, 50 shekels, God has numbered you, and your kingdom has been put to an end. Verse 26. Tekel, 1 shekel, and you've been weighed on the scales, and against 50, does 1 shekel tip out well? No, you're a lightweight. That's what he's saying. You got the scale. Oh, by the way, you think of the scales where it's got the little pivot and the little baskets. You put 50 shekels on this side, and this your kingdom, and then here's you 1 shekel. Boom, you're found to be a lightweight. So your kingdom then is cut into half a shekel, 2 halves. Boom, you get to be a half a shekel, Perez, which is literally 1 shekel chopped in half. And he says, and so because of this, your kingdom is going to be divided into halves, and it's going to go to the Medes and the Persians. Now, Daniel prophesies this and to Belshazzar. And by the way, this is what historically happens. A lot of guys get really uptight that the book of Daniel is so accurate. Like, how could he know exactly what kingdom will come next? It must have been written way after the fact. A lot of critics of the book of Daniel have used the criticism that was written maybe thousands of years later, where they could line up all these kingdoms in it. But we found manuscripts that are from back way before that, like right after Daniel wrote them, and there are even copies in secular volumes that we can prove, hey, this was already written, and Daniel did know which kingdom would come next because God showed him. The Medes and the Persians get to have this next. Well, listen to the end of the chapter, and I'm going to finish up quick today. I'm trying to shorten my messages. My daughter says I'll do better at reaching more people. So I'm trying. Okay, here I go. He says, verse 29, then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple, put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now has authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. Oh boy, Daniel's happy day, for Daniel, except for the next verse. Then that same night, Belshazzar, it says, the Chaldean king was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about age 62. So Daniel gets to be third ruler, under Belshazzar for how long? Well, a couple hours. They put the robe on, put the gold necklace on. You're the third ruler. Woo, happy party. And Daniel had already said, you can keep your gold. You can keep your robe. I don't care. I'll give you the interpretation. But you see the heart of Daniel. He's not impressed with these things. And I believe, maybe he already knew this is not going to end well for this guy anyway. But he might glanced at the wall and went, "Yep, I know what this means. Ain't gonna, like keep your gold, keep your rope. It's not gonna last. Like it's not even gonna last. He's good. By the end of the night, Darius breaks in. That they're now historically they're having a big feast for these nobles. They've all been drinking wine. Their leadership. You got 1,000 of them gathered in one place. And what does the enemy say? Hey, they're all drunk. They're all, at the palace. They're all in one place. If we strike hard and hit them all at once, we just took out the whole leader, right? This is like how a strategist. I grew up with a grandfather was a 3-star general most of my life on Vandenberg Air Force Base. Then when he retired, he went to 4-star general. So that's as high as you could go at that time in the military. And so he always taught me things about strategies. And I think about this. I think this is a total setup. You got all the guys drunk. They're all hanging out in the palace with the king, and right, there's all the nobles, all the leaders, just go in, slaughter them while they're wasted, and then easy fighting, and then take over. And that's what Darius did. Darius winds up taking over and receives the kingdom when he's 62 years old. Now we'll get to Cyrus, the Persian, a little bit later in the book of Daniel, but this is the intro of one kingdom transitioning to the next. Okay. And this is a fulfillment of scripture that Daniel said. Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold. He doesn't even talk about Belshazzar. I don't even know if he was a neck between the arms and chest of silver. Remember, he said the arms and chest of silver is going to be a kingdom 2 parts. And like silver is inferior to gold, so the Medo-Persian Empire will be inferior to the Babylonian Empire. If you study world history, then after that comes the Grecian Empire, the midsection of bronze. That's Alexander the Great, and then the legs, the strong iron legs. What kingdom was that? You guys remember? Rome. That's Rome. And then the last kingdom of this earth is going to be feet of iron with toes of iron and clay, and it's going to be like clay and iron don't really mix, but you could press them together. And so it's going to be in the last days, we're going to have some kind of neo-Roman kingdom ruling before Jesus comes back. The stone that comes and dashes.
Like the 10 kingdoms?
Yeah, there are going to be like 10 kings. And we'll get more into that. It's described later in Daniel. I'm just reminding you of Nebuchadnezzar's vision God gave him, how that stone cut without hands dashed the statue on the feet. It all crumbled, became chaff, and blew away. And then the stone grew into a great mountain and filled the earth. And we know that stone is Jesus, the stone that the builders rejected. That's the last kingdom that's going to rule on this earth. That's really good for us to process sometimes, because we see stuff going on in the world news and people are stressing out, changes are happening. And I'm thinking, yeah, a lot of this is all very exciting for me because I'm a student of scripture, and so many prophecies being fulfilled right now. God is like arranging the chessboard just the way he said it's going to happen. When the kings of the north are going to join these ones from the east, they're going to come together against Israel. And we've never seen all the players starting to line up on the board the way that it's happening right now. So I'm excited. That means the stone is coming pretty soon. There is going to be a kingdom set up. And that's why guys in Bible prophecy circles are like, is the European Union, is that the 10 toes, or is the United Nations, when they first had 10 members, they were like, that's the 10 toes. And everyone's we're trying to see it from this side of history. And when we look back with hindsight, we'll go, oh yeah, that's what it was. I'll make to it. Right now we don't know, but we can keep seeking him, and we can keep waiting. And we want to be like we talked about the 5 wise virgins that keep their lamps full of oil. Okay, whenever that trumpet is blown to come into the wedding feast, I don't know about you guys, but I want to be ready to go. Trim my lamp and let's go. Get me out of here. I'm going to a wedding that's to Jesus. We're the bride of Christ. He's the groom. So looking forward to that. Anyway, we'll get more into Daniel, and more of this will start to make sense historically as we look at Darius next week in chapter 6. So if you want to read ahead, read Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to try to sign off quickly. And until next week, may the Lord bless you and he keep you. And may his spirit just give you that peace that you need. If you're facing any trials this week, just know that the Lord loves you even more than we love you from Hawaii. And if you want prayer, put a prayer request into the comments below, and we'll gladly pray for you. We got folks here that are real prayer warriors. We'll pray and lift you up to the Lord. So I'll see you next week, and blessings until then. Aloha.